If you're a kid, please make note of this. It's for your own good.
This game makes me want to take a vacation more, and it makes me even sadder that we're in this current predicament.
Shantae is a series that always puts a smile on my face. I've talked about it on quite a few occasions, and I can return to any of its entries for a great time. I admit that I haven't played the 2002 original, and while I've heard okay things about it, I don't think I'm missing much by skipping it now, given that not everything in it has aged all that well. Risky's Revenge, while it is pretty bare, is still a fun time and has a lot of charm. Pirate's Curse is absolutely fantastic. I love its pace, its role and dungeon design, its soundtrack, and how it feels to overall play. Definitely the series highlight for me. And Half Genie Hero, despite some departures, is a great time that I'm sure anyone can enjoy, and has some of the franchise's best presentation. So when a 5th title was confirmed to be in the works, you bet I got excited for it. The fact that they were returning to the Metroidvania structure the first 3 games had was an immediate plus for me, and every screenshot I did see of what they were proposing told me that this would be more of what I love from our beloved Half Genie girl. I also had high hopes that they advanced the production values a bit, given that they got Studio Trigger, yeah, that Studio Trigger, to make a fully animated opening for the game. I love this opening, as it really does blend in the studio's talent with Shantae charm. What's not to love? An earlier build of the game was released segmentally on the Apple Arcade first, likely to get their feet wet into it given how the Apple Arcade is still in its infancy stage, before being released fully on consoles and PC. You can easily find it on those systems for $30. If you are cool with dealing with the fact that it was released segmentally and paying a continuous fee for the arcade, I can totally see one enjoying the version available for Apple devices. But for me, I prefer playing my Shantae on consoles, like the Switch in this case. But is the game worth getting in the first place? Well, that's why I'm here to tell you. And I need to point this out before we begin. This game is still relatively new. It's not even a month old at the time I'm writing this. So if you want to see as little footage of the game as possible from the eyes of a reviewer, there you go. Also, no, WayForward did not provide a review copy for me. I'm just a guy who bought the game on the Switch day one, and felt like giving my honest thoughts on it to contribute to the ongoing discussions about it. Strike while the iron's hot, as they say. Anyways, that's all, so let's go and see how this Half Genie's adventure stacks up. So hey, how about that? Our story begins with a fully animated cutscene. It seems weird starting off the segment with a remark like that, but for Shantae, who mostly does text boxes with stacked portraits for dialogue exchanges, even in this game, this is really neat to see. Anyways, back on topic, Shantae, along with her uncle Mimic and friends Sky and Bolo, all take a vacation to Paradise Island. That is an inconspicuous name for a popular vacation spot if I ever heard one. They're apparently here to take a load off from Skulltown and to participate in the first ever Half Genie Festival. At first, all goes pretty well, with the group getting acquainted with the town, and Shantae immediately hitting it up with other Half Genies participating. And with that, the opening of the festival commences on Paradise Island, where absolutely nothing goes wrong. Something goes wrong.
Hello?
Oh, he's gone! He's been taken up! Oh, he's been taken!
So yeah, all the other Half Genies except for Shantae just straight up vanish, leaving the townsfolk in disarray, and Shantae wastes no time in going out to find the cause of the problem, which leads to her running into her nemesis Risky Boots because grass is green, and eventually finding out that the cause of all this is a group of creatures called the Seven Sirens, a relatively inconsequential group of villains that mostly serve as bosses, with the exception of their leader who is revealed at the end of the game, and I think that speaks for itself. So overall, this plot is really simple, but I don't think it's badly constructed. It does get to the point of what you need to know, and does a decent job in giving you a reason to go on this adventure. I especially think the writing is spot on. I really do love how well the cast works off each other, and I can recall several moments where I was charmed or really amused. It gets the job done, though I wish some things got more focus. Like, I really like these Half Genies. I really get invested into their personalities, and while I feel like the game does a decent amount with them, I wanted more of them. After they get kidnapped and after you rescue them, they mostly serve as giving you a new power and then becoming the most basic form of background characters afterwards, with maybe the exception of Harmony, but that's only because they try to tie her into background lore in Shantae's past that never goes beyond a hint here. If you ask me, that's a little disappointing. I mean, they are still a lot of fun, but I wanted more than what I got from them. Same thing goes for the Seven Sirens, as aside from their leader, they don't get much character, so to speak of, and only get boss fights. And that's sad because they have really cool designs, and I think that their base concept of their vendetta against half-genies and some other ideas presented could be cool if the game gave them more to work with. I overall do enjoy this plot, but I definitely wanted more of certain things. Even if Shantae isn't exactly played for the story, the more interesting things don't get the amount of attention as I would have liked. One thing Shantae games do well in is the presentation. No matter what the system, they always have some amazingly detailed sprites that do make the world feel even more alive. And here is no exception. Even if a lot of sprites are recycled from Half Genie Hero, they're still as beautiful as they ever were, and have plenty of great animations to go around. Shantae is just as expressive as she ever was, the side characters definitely get some attention, and the enemies look just as sprawling as ever, with some not present in Half Genie Hero actually getting new sprites, which is great. Same thing goes for the character portraits, which are probably my favorite set so far. Come on, how can anyone look at that face and not get a smile? The backgrounds did regress a bit and go back to being static 2D drawings instead of 3D models blending in well with the character sprites, but I personally don't mind this as they still have a lot more detail and life within them. But if you liked the advancement with the more 3D model platforms, sorry to say it was dropped here. If I did have one problem with the environments, is that there are a couple that blend into one another. Because this game takes place a lot under Paradise Island, you're going to be seeing a lot of caves and tubes. Now for the most part, they do manage to make them feel just a little bit distinct from one another, but there are a couple that do feel like they go a little too well together. It doesn't bother me too much, but it's noticeable. One advancement in presentation I love though is the inclusion of fully animated cutscenes. Of course there's the intro by Studio Trigger and the intro cutscene, but the rest look great too, even if WayForward did do them themselves. There's only a few at the beginning and end of the games, and the in-betweeners are mostly there to introduce a major boss, but there's undeniably a lot of charm to seeing characters animated like never before, and I do think these do well in moving things along, as well as having the voice acting shine out more. For the most part, the voice acting is great. A lot of the castings here were good choices, and they do breathe life into the game's really solid writing. I only wish they went full throttle with it, because in text box exchanges, for some reason, there are many lines that are voiced and many that are not, and they constantly clash with each other, even in the same scenes. With how far they went with voice acting, this issue is constantly distracting, and I think at this point, they may as well went with a fully voiced script. Another unfortunate part is that there are some dents that were unintentionally caused by these advancements. The first one is that there are a few spots where the frame rate does get a little choppy. I can count these spots on one hand so it isn't too bad, but yeah. The second one, and the more major one, is definitely the loading times. There are a lot of these in the game, and they occur every time you enter a new part of the map, or in some other instance of cutscene loading. They are too long for my liking, but because of the number of them, they add up, and it's not good for the game's pace. Not to mention we are considering previous entries didn't need to load all that much. Now we get to the part of the presentation that is probably the most difficult to talk about for me, and that's the soundtrack. This is the first Shantae soundtrack that was not composed by the one who did the previous OSTs, Jake Kaufman, and it really does show. Now, don't get me wrong, the soundtrack as a whole is really good, and I do commend the ones who made each track, but when paired up with the soundtracks of previous entries, it feels like something was lost when Kaufman wasn't included. Seven Sirens' music doesn't have quite the same bounce or catchiness that the other games had. A couple do come close, and in those cases they're great, but most of the time it feels like it's falling short, or is marking stuff like chiptune off a checklist. Here, let me play a few tracks from previous games and some from here, and you'll see what I mean. You see where I'm getting at, right? There's a spark that's just not there. I'm sorry if I'm comparing this game's OST to Kaufman's works a lot, because at the end of the day, this OST is still really good, and the composers definitely deserve credits, but I can't help it. It's an uphill battle that I just can't shake off. I might have spent a little time with problems I had with the presentation, but honestly, despite those, Seven Sirens are still great in terms of visual and sound. I love the sprites, the portraits, I dare you to say no to these faces, the voice acting, and most of the soundtrack. It's just that the themes are pretty noticeable, and I think they can be improved on somewhere down the line. That's all. We may be away from Skulltown for a while, but make no misunderstanding, this is a Shantae game through and through. Shantae controls exactly the same as she did previously, so there's little I can complain about because she is always controlled fantastically. And we're back to the Metroidvania structure for this one, away from the Mega Man-esque style of stage progression from Half Genie Hero. You may not be able to explore a lot of Paradise Island at first, but there are opportunities to explore and find hidden goodies. Granted, you won't find very many upgrades that will let Shantae more freedom to explore by just looking around the map. Those are reserved for dungeons. Like the first 3 games, there are dungeons all across the island that provide a different set of challenges for you that'll eventually lead you to discovering a new transformation that'll let you explore more, and after using it to defeat that dungeon's boss, it's time to move on. It's a simple structure, but I really enjoy it given the game's pacing. Things keep moving in Seven Sirens, giving you time to process what's happening, but never to a point of crawling. It's a smooth ride through and through, and if you value that about the series, you'll be right at home here. Going back to the transformation part, they made a change to them that I honestly adore. Previously, you had to dance and then scroll through what you needed in order to transform, but now you can just press a button corresponding to said form, and there you go. I much prefer this direction as it keeps things moving, and it just makes progression so much more convenient. Not to mention, there are some challenges that actually make some nifty use in how easy they are to activate, though not a lot. The forms themselves are also fun to use. Well, mostly. The drill just lets you dig and that's all there is to it, and the frog form just lets you swim, only in 4 directions. I don't like how this thing controls, and it's a massive step back from the mermaid form previously. However, the nude form is basically a better monkey form since you can dash at any time, the tortoise form is basically a better elephant since it does fast traveling better, and the octopus form is just a triple jump, and I think that speaks for itself. But if you like how Shantae dances, well, the mechanic has been completely reworked. After dungeons, each one of the half genies will lend you their magic and give you a new dance ability altogether. It's not a form or anything, it's just a move that covers the whole screen and causes the corresponding effect to happen. Plinks makes previously invisible objects visible, though the biggest use it has is making platforms appear. Veros rejuvenates dead objects, including poisonous water. Zapples zaps the whole screen, hurting enemies and electrifying certain sources. And Harmony causes earthquakes that just open some things up. Though because it can also be used as an attack, I do like using it. Even though I do enjoy using the last 2 for attacking and all of them for fighting bonuses, it is kind of a bummer that these don't go beyond just making non-accessible areas accessible. It may lead to more stuff, which I like, but I get the feeling that they are more so liabilities, more than expansions to Shantae herself. It's like you see an electrical rod, and then it's time to use that electric field. And don't get me wrong, I do like using these dances, especially when I'm rewarded for my curiosity. But they don't feel as diverse as they should, beyond opening paths and hurting enemies. That's what I'm getting at. But there is plenty of room to explore this world, as you can easily rack up some money to purchase magic spells, some of which Shantae has had for a while, and some are borrowed from Half Genie Hero's Risky mode, which is cool. But the shops can also give you a few passive upgrades like upgrading your damage output and whip speed, drawing money closer towards you, and eventually decreasing the amount of damage you take and how fast you consume your magic meter. There's also the returning hard squids that you can take to one of the squidsmiths in any of the 3 towns to expand your health, and gold nuggets that you can use to exchange for some rare monster cards. Now at first, monster cards just seem like a time sink and something that would give completionists something to grind. And while grinding is probably necessary if you want to 100% this game, I do like how the monster cards are as a mechanic. When you collect enough of them, you can actually equip them for Shantae for some passive buffs, like drilling or swimming faster, doing more damage with a certain attack, not taking damage from hazards like spikes, among other things. Sure, you might need to go and collect in order to get the buffs you want, and they don't change the core of the game that much, but I think this mechanic is really cool as it makes certain processes more convenient and can make the world more comfortable to travel through. I had some fun finding out why I enjoy it the most, and I appreciate the variety, even if the game isn't all that hard. For the most part, the enemy design is not too bad, though some enemies might give you some trouble in your first run. But I will say that the food drop rate is a little too high. Food essentially restores your health, and the more valuable ones also restore your magic. However, as soon as the game starts, many enemies will drop food, even some of the rarer ones, so you will be really prepared for the game ahead. I was constantly stocked on food for the whole game, and got away with being incredibly reckless, even in later areas. I mean, sure, it means nothing drags, but at the same time, I feel like the amount of food I got was overkill, especially when those long chains of one-hit kill enemies got involved. I found no need to buy potions from the shop, and I got the grand majority of store upgrades relatively early on. I'm not a stickler for difficulty, as I can easily enjoy a game just by easiness, but I feel like the food could have been toned back. If you are a stickler for that kind of thing, then you might need to limit yourself or play on New Game Plus mode received after finishing the game, where you take more damage, but you can use more magic, which is an issue. One high point I would like to praise is definitely the dungeon design. In terms of having the same structure of exploring what you can, finding a new form, and using that form to comb through the entire place and being the boss, I believe each one does a good job in shaking things up and testing you in different ways to see what you can do to proceed through. They even have some clever ways of hiding hard squids and other goodies, which is very nice. However, one low point they have in them is the boss fights. Risky's fine enough as she is as the midway boss, but the fact that you fight her in every dungeon minus the last one, and thus fight her 5 times total, gets really exhausting. Helped out by the fact that she doesn't change a lot between fights, beyond adding in a new attack and getting more health. And one reason why I wanted the Seven Sirens to be something more is that their battles are also a low point for me. I don't mind easy bosses as long as they manage to be fun, but they have slow attack patterns, don't do that much, even with a ridiculous amount of food, and they're just fights where not much is going on. They're pretty boring. With the exception of the final boss, which I won't show, but I will say it was a breath of fresh air, tense as heck, and an overall strong note for the game to end on. Overall, even if the weaker parts are pretty noticeable, Seven Sirens does deliver in terms of gameplay, and I say it's probably some of the slickest and most refined a Shantae game has been up to this point. It feels really good, and I'm really happy that it was kept intact. I may have spent some time with problems I do have with this game, like the overabundance of food, how some story beats aren't as taken advantage of as they could have been, some middling presentation parts, and the boring bosses, but honestly, I still love Seven Sirens despite all this. It definitely stays true to what makes Shantae what she is, while adding in some improvements and ideas that I want to become mainstays. I really do see an incredible game blossoming from these ideas, and the problems I mentioned are issues that can easily be ironed out later on, whether or not they decide to improve on this game or just move on. Whatever the case, Shantae and the Seven Sirens is a definite must-play if you enjoy previous entries, and if you want to make this your first Shantae game, I don't see the harm in doing so. I will say that if you do associate length and price together, the game as of right now is worth $30, which isn't that bad for game standards, but it's also not that cheap. And for length, my first playthrough of the game clocked in about 8 hours, while the playthrough I did for this review took about 5.5. Personally, I feel fine that I spent $30 to get this game, but if that sounds a little too steep for you, that's understandable. Either way, this is another solid title from WayForward, and I only hope they can go forward from here. I am the Lightning Ripper, and can we play as Battle Armor Shantae in a future game? Please?